Day 3 of waiting to see if former President Donald Trump will be indicted by the grand jury after Mr. Trump tweeted out that he'd be arrested on Tuesday. So how will it go down if the indictment indeed does happen?
Yeah, so here to help us answer that is attorney Franklin Monsour Jr., a former federal prosecutor in Florida, now at the Orrick Law Firm in New York. So welcome, Mr. Monsour. Thanks so much for being here. And we should point out, though, that you represented a client in a lawsuit brought on by Donald Trump, but that suit was dismissed, but there's still an appeal in the process.
That's correct.
All possible. But let's talk about the topic at hand. If former President Trump is indicted, I mean, will he be handcuffed? Will it be like a typical defendant?
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, I think when the indictment happens, if it happens, obviously the timing, you mentioned Tuesday, that came from Donald Trump alone. There was no indication from the DA's office of Tuesday or any specific date for an indictment, and we still don't know what that date would be. Mm-hmm. But if it does happen, you know, what's more likely, and quite common actually for white-collar cases, is there's a process worked out between the prosecutors and the defense attorneys for the defendant to come and self-surrender and be processed and arraigned in a fairly smooth process that usually concludes in the same day, and then the defendant leaves. And that's certainly the case when the defendant is not a flight risk. And if I were Donald Trump's attorneys, I would argue he's certainly not a flight risk. Mm-hmm. There's nowhere in the world he could hide, and
Exactly.
It's certainly not his MO to not be front and center in something like this.
Yeah, well, he has said himself that he would follow procedure and turn himself in if it comes to that. But, you know, why do you think in the first place that the Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, would go after this case when some would say there are other easier cases to prove, like manipulating the votes in Georgia? We touched upon this yesterday with some of our guests, but it's starting to grow in conversation on social media about multiple cases and which one is easier to prove.
Right. I mean, we're in a strange situation anyway, but even stranger that we're talking about multiple criminal investigations of a former president. I agree with a lot of people that I'm surprised that the New York case is sort of taking the lead in timing. But it makes some sense. It's a simpler case, right? The facts are simpler. The focus is more narrow than, for example, any case that deals with January 6th or false electors. Those are much more fact intensive. They're going to require much more fact building to build those prosecutions. So that includes the Georgia case, and of course, it includes cases that the Department of Justice is investigating. So that makes some sense.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
As far as strength goes, I agree that the New York case seems to have some faults that others might not have. So I think that's why some people are a little surprised that this would be the front runner.
Can we talk about the possible charges here in New York? Falsifying records is a misdemeanor, but when does it take that step up and become a felony?
Right, that's a really good question, and one that's been, it's a very sort of legal question that people have been focused on. Yeah. I mean, certainly the business records misdemeanor is fairly straightforward here, right, in the context of the hush money payments that we're talking about. Obviously, those were not represented as hush money payments in the records. They were represented as legal payments or a legal retainer to Michael Cohen that we now know or appears to be false, right? And Michael Cohen has said that was not the case. That was not a legal retainer that was being paid for. So that's pretty straightforward. To turn that into a felony, though, that business records violation has to be linked to another crime, either to further another crime or to conceal another crime. And in this case, the crime that everyone's talking about linking to that business records violation, the one that I think makes the most sense is the campaign finance violations that Michael Cohen was actually indicted for and served time for.
Yeah. Can you help us understand what exactly happened played out yesterday, right? Donald Trump, former President Trump, comes out and says Tuesday's the day. Tuesday's not the day. Wednesday, the grand jury is told not to come. And so now we're reconvening today. What is the timeline, in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't know that any of those things actually relate to each other.
Okay.
The prosecutors tend to keep their head down and do the work, and they should, right? They should let the work speak for itself, one way or the other. In the end, the work will speak for itself.
Yeah.
And so my guess is they're really being vigilant in doing that here, right? Trying to not sort of ignore the noise that's coming from Donald Trump or his supporters as far as timing goes.
Right, but could it have anything to do, the timing, with an indictment versus when there's an arrest? Some were saying that it may have been a security issue of holding off on the indictment closer to the point that the former president would be brought in.
It's conjecture at this point. I mean, it's not uncommon for grand juries to get a day off, right?
Okay.
While prosecutors sort of collect themselves, maybe not in relation to anything that Donald Trump has said, but simply in building their case. Maybe they're considering new witnesses to put in front of the grand jury. I don't think we'll know right until it happens, whether it's today, tomorrow, or next week. I certainly think the indications are there that it's going to be in the short term.
Yeah, so if an indictment does happen, and you seem to indicate that you think that it definitely will, how long would a trial, or could a trial last?
Yeah, that's also a tough question. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm a broken record. But
It's okay.
It's an unprecedented territory.
Yes,
right.
Never been here before.
I've never talked about this before. I can listen, trials take a long time because the judge will set a schedule. That schedule will include motion practice. I'm sure there will be a motion to dismiss filed on Trump's side. There's going to be discovery, disputes, and some of this is for good reason, right? When you're a defendant, the moment the prosecutor indicts the case, they're miles ahead, right? They've had all this time to build their case, talk to witnesses, and as a defense attorney, you need to get up to speed really quickly, and you need the court to give you time to do that, so that you can get smart on the case and sort of match the knowledge of the prosecutors. So I think that will delay things legitimately. I do think that the fact that we're dealing with a candidate for president will actually speed up the process. I think it's possible that the prosecutors and the judge will think this case should be resolved before people go to the polls and make decisions.
I'm sure there are a lot of people that are hoping that you're right.
Yeah, I know, seriously. I appreciate you coming in this morning with your expertise. Uncharted territory for sure, but I appreciate your expertise.
Of course. Thanks for having me.